Good morning, everyone. We're starting the second session of the symposium. Let me first introduce myself. My name is Juan Antonio Valles, and I'm Director of Secretariat of the Development Cooperation at the University of Zaragoza. I would like to thank the symposium organizers for inviting me to host this session. Before continuing, I would like to clarify that I'm not much related to the agri-food sector. In fact, I'm a physicist. Therefore, I apologize beforehand for any mistake that I may make during the session. In this second session of the symposium, we aim to understand how can the European cooperation agencies adapt their strategies and policies in the agri-food sector in response to the new geopolitical context and the drastic changes affecting international cooperation in order to make sure their work remains impactful and effective. I'm going to read an excerpt from an article written by a former Spanish foreign minister that was published this last weekend, which in my opinion accurately describes the current geopolitical situation. We live in times when the key word is not risk, but uncertainty. Risk can be calculated and modeled. Uncertainty cannot. We are experiencing the end of the implicit contract of predictability that sustained globalization, the idea that the future would be an orderly extension of the present. What is emerging is a proliferation of discontinuities where events are linked without logic and decisions are made under constant pressure from the unexpected. Not all actors in the agri-food sector face the same challenges, nor do they share the same target communities. This is precisely why the session is structured as a dialogue between organizations with different mandates, geographies, and operational strategies. The diversity of the panel should allow us to surface those differences and to identify common ground where it exists. I would like to briefly introduce and greet the 6 panelists. Some of them will be joining us online. Maurizio Navarra, Secretariat Coordinator of the Global Donor Platform for Rural Development. Good morning, Maurizio. Santiago Morán is the Head of Regional Programs Department with Arab countries at the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation. Good morning, Santiago. Federica de Gaetano, Head of Food Safety and Health in the Permanent Representation of Italy in Brussels. Good morning, Federica. Federica, are you?
Good morning to everybody.
Okay, thank you, Federica. Elisabeth Claverie de Saint-Martin is the Chief Executive Officer of the French Agricultural Research and Cooperation Organization. Good morning, Elisabeth.
Good morning to everybody.
Songbae Lee, who has been former Agricultural Finance Team Lead at the United States Agency for International Development. Good morning, Songbae.
Good morning.
And last but not least, the rapporteur for the panel will be Georgios Prekatsakis, Supervisor of the Soil Science and Plant Diagnostic Laboratory at CIHEAM in Hania. Good morning, Georgios. Morning. Okay, the session will proceed as follows. Each panelist will have 15 minutes for a presentation. Then after the 5 presentations, 10-15 minutes will be dedicated to questions and comments. Following the preset order, our first speaker is Maurizio Navarra. Maurizio is a Senior Partnership Officer coordinating the Secretariat of the Global Donor Platform for Rural Development, a network of 45 international agencies focused on investments in food system, agriculture, and rural development. With more than 30 years of experience, 12 in the private sector and 21 in the UN system, he specializes in global engagement, multilateral relations, South-South and triangular cooperation, knowledge management and communications. He holds a master's degree in political science and macroeconomics from the University of Rome, La Sapienza. Maurizio, the floor is yours.
Take
The remote.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, cool. Good morning, everyone. We will listen to an extremely interesting session this morning, which really set the stage for the conversations that we're just having in this panel. Thank you to CIHEAM Zaragoza for bringing us together here. I'll use these 15 minutes to share reflections from one of our most recent products, the Global Donor Platform for Rural Development white paper, which we presented at the Financing for Development conference in Seville, because we can talk about multilateralism, we can talk about the crisis of multilateralism, but there's a lot going on in the financing spectrum, in particular for development cooperation at large, but for food systems specifically. And we are going to see how international cooperation, especially European cooperation, can adapt to remain relevant and impactful in transforming food systems. So let me just repeat very briefly what we've heard for an hour and a half today. We're operating in a world where geopolitical divides are sharp, trust in institutions is eroding, and development finance is under strain. What the World Economic Forum recently called a flatlined global cooperation landscape. I wouldn't be that dramatic, but this is where we are currently. So ODA is shrinking in real terms. Emerging economies are also becoming donors and are challenging traditional world economies, processes, and power balances. And the food systems agenda, once a high priority after COVID and the war in Ukraine, risks being eclipsed by short-term crisis management and domestic priority. So actually, the question isn't just how the world is changing, it's really trying to understand whether the current model of cooperation can keep up. So donors in the bilateral and multilateral spectrum, in particular in agri-food systems, they face conflicting demands, the crisis response versus long-term transformation, domestic pressures versus global responsibility, and fiscal constraints versus expectation for impact. We've heard all about this in the previous session. But at the same time, partner countries are asking for different things. They're asking for flexibility, predictability, and partnerships that reflect mutual benefit, not dependency. So donors are increasingly being asked to do more with less money, trust, and time. Some people are even saying they're being asked to do less with less. So given this context, where does this leave agri-food systems? Cooperation is changing at large for all sectors, but where do agri-food systems stand in all this? Can we still expect agri-food systems to remain high in the international agenda? Now, if you actually think about it, since 2021, the agri-food world, the paradigm has already shifted. Now, we more often talk about sustainable food systems transformation, a shift from input-driven development to integrated approaches combining food, climate, jobs, and equity. Now, the problem is that more too often, our cooperation models are lagging behind. They're very much fragmented, they're still short-term sighted, and often disconnected from national priorities. So they're not particularly efficient, not designed around long-term resilient inclusion of sustainability. So if we really want to make agri-food systems more efficient and effective, we will need massive amounts of resources. And I'm not talking only about finance, but mostly it will boil down to finance. And the problem is that if public donors retreat, if the multilateral system retreats, others will fill the space, often with narratives that are less aligned with sustainability or inclusion. Let me remind very briefly who we are. For those who don't know us, and I know a lot of people in this room know who we are. We are a network of 44 bilateral and multilateral organizations, mostly bilateral donors and multilateral development banks, IFIs, and multilateral institutions. We do have an objective of lobbying for increased public and private investment in agriculture and rural development. We have a board, and the current board members are all listed there. I'm not going to repeat them, and I'm very, very happy that Federica de Gaetano from Italy, one of our co-chairs, is also joining the session today. We are a completely informal and non-political convening space, and we're bringing together around our board representatives from ministries of foreign affairs, sometimes representatives from development agencies of the countries you see listed, to bring harmony, to try to bring harmony to this mess and try to, have at least harmonized policies and strategies with the objective of catalyzing change, as you see in our mission, in our vision, and brokering donor collaboration for better impact, because our joint goal is always to have an impact. Otherwise, we can all close shops and find other jobs. So we prepared a white paper that was presented in Seville at the end of June this year, which is about financing agri-food systems for people, planet, and prosperity, which is also the title of this presentation. So it emerged from a high-level dialogue among donor agencies and development finance institutions. Please download it if you haven't done so. It's on our website. It's pretty short. It's pretty, targeted. And the aim that we were having when we published it was not to have another technical report, but a political signal, a collective call to remanage how we finance agri-food systems for people, planet, and prosperity, because we were worried that the sector would be underfunded, that would be forgotten in Seville at the expenses of other sectors. So it identifies few key shifts, but we're going to look at them together. So let me remind you very briefly, because we've heard this many times already over the year, but also in the previous session, how we consume food and produce it is central to assuring everyone's well-being, and for human health to be environmentally sustainable for people's livelihoods. Our food systems must profoundly change. So to bring about this change, we need a new collective understanding of food systems, a shift in what we consume, and very different economic incentives as well. So this all calls for a long-term perspective and a better understanding of what today's decision might mean for the future. And we see already some numbers emerging in this line: the cost of malnutrition, the percentage of population that cannot afford a healthy diet. This links pretty much to also what we've heard from Juan Echanove this morning on the right to food. And there is a calculation that was carried out by FAO, and we have incorporated in our white paper, that the hidden cost of food is more or less $12 trillion per year, which is staggering. Sorry, I'm gonna have to, yes, exactly. So the human and economic cost of not transforming food systems are huge, 12.8 trillion. The investments needed are also massive, but you will see they're a fraction of what the costs actually are. And public finance for food and agriculture is tight and dwindling. So there are substantial sources of financing that could be mobilized in addition to the traditional finance, and we're going to have a look at that. But the message of the white paper, and also of the messages we've heard in Seville, is that public financing must become catalytic, public resources must be repurposed, and coordination and fragmentation reduction is critical. I'm going to move very quickly on that. These are all numbers that you find in the white paper. But just to give an idea, the global GDP amounts to 106 trillion. These are 2024 data. There are calculations about the cost of transforming food systems that relate to the hidden cost of food. So I said that the hidden cost of food amounts to circa 12 trillion per year. There's various calculations about the cost for transforming food systems on the left-hand side of this slide. There's a calculation from 2021 that estimates around 400 billion per year. There are more recent calculations from FAO, 1.2 trillion per year. The difference is quite staggering. Yet the message is that it's still a fraction of the hidden costs of food that amount to 12 trillion per year. And when we look at the available resources, we see that, the global agri-food sector, not the ODA, of course, but the amounts that are invested in the global agri-food sector amount to 12 trillion per year. And there is investment by informal producers, climate finance to agri-food sectors, 28 billion more or less, ODA to agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. So the size of the little circles on the left-hand side give you quite a staggering image of what the financing gap is. But if you look at the right-hand side, you see also potential investment sources. So 1.57 trillion coming from impact investment, climate finance, remittances, which are even larger than ODA as such, and agricultural support. And when we talk about innovative financing, we mostly talk about pool donors, private finance funds, bonds, blended finance, loans, equity investment, guarantees, first loss. And we're going to have a look at that also with our friend Songbae, who is going to talk at the end of this session. So the white paper recommends 4 systemic shifts. And some of them sound obvious, but implementing them means deep institutional change. First, we need to go from projects to systems, integrate finance, policy, and partnerships around national pathways. Secondly, we need to look at moving from short-term aid to long-term investment. Again, this sounds pretty much obvious, but concessional finance needs to be used to de-risk, leverage, and crowd in private capital. This was one of the most central messages of the Seville conference, the Financing for Development conference this year. Third, we need to go from fragmentation to coordination, build whole of donor ecosystem, aligned with multilateral platforms. And then clearly, position agri-food systems are levers for climate, biodiversity, and peace. So in a nutshell, what we need to do is really shift the narrative, mitigate risks, reduce fragmentation by coordinating, and clearly being representative of the global donor platform for rural development. My obvious message is to increase better coordination. Now, European cooperation, clear, has a unique legacy in development, but today risks being overtaken by the pace of change. The EU Green Deal, the Global Gateway, we all hear about these huge initiatives, and bilateral cooperation also by the various countries offer really huge potential, but often they operate in silos. They operate too independently. So if Europe really wants to lead, it must bring coherence between its development, climate, and geopolitical agendas. And it must take more political risks and invest in partnerships rather than control. And we all know what I'm clearly referring to here. Now, in Seville, donors, multilateral development banks, governments converged in one simple message, 2 minutes. Transformation happens when national systems lead and external actors support those systems. And participants also emphasize the software of change, institution, knowledge, and governance, rather than just the hardware or infrastructure. So ODA must be smarter, more catalytic, and focused on enabling long-term investment. These are the 3 takeaways from my experience in Seville in the Global Donor Platform for European Development Agencies. First, system thinking, because fragmentation kills impact. Second, coordination and influence, because governance matter as much as finance. And third, trust and reciprocity that needs to be rebuilt, because cooperation without trust is just transaction, clearly. So the real challenge, again, and we've heard it many times this morning, is political will, not the lack of technical tools, not the lack of resources. And I had prepared a couple of slides also on the consequences for NGOs, but I think we can take this point during the conversation later. One slide on what NGOs and local actors should prepare for. I mean, I'm not particularly an expert of NGOs, but clearly there are consequences on how they organize their work and how they look at future opportunities. Yeah, I will stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maurizio, for adjusting to the 15 minutes. There were 20 seconds left. Okay, and for this global perspective on the problem. We are going to focus now in the challenges and new strategies of national development cooperation agencies. Our next speaker will be Santiago Morán. He's head of regional programs in the Department of Cooperation with the Arab World of the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation. With over 11 years at this agency, he has also served as Spanish Cooperation Coordinator for Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Head of Service for Latin America and the Caribbean. He holds a master's in Strategies and Technologies for Human Development, a master's in Archival Studies, and a degree in Geography and History. Santiago, the floor is yours.
Buenos días. Buenos días a todos. Es un honor estar aquí, invitados por el CIAM, estar en este simposio. El CIAM es una institución fundamental en el panorama agroalimentario mediterráneo y es la razón principal por la que estamos aquí, aparte de ser buenos socios y que hemos empezado un camino juntos que esperemos que lleve a buen puerto y sigamos haciendo cooperación, que es lo que se necesita y como voy a exponer ahora en el marco de mi intervención. Voy a repetir bastante de lo que ha dicho Maurizio y porque hay una serie de temas que evidentemente yo creo que son una obviedad. Nos reunimos en un momento que el propio programa de este simposio define acertadamente como una crisis geopolítica que exige nuevos modelos de cooperación. No es una hipérbole. A la fragmentación geopolítica se suma una emergencia existencial. El Mediterráneo no es solo un espectador, es un punto caliente de cambio climático que se calienta a un ritmo superior a la media mundial. Ya no hablamos de proyecciones lejanas, hablamos de las peores sequías en 200 años, de las olas de calor que baten récords año tras año en toda la cuenca mediterránea y de la devastación de eventos extremos como la tormenta Daniel en el sudeste de Europa, Turquía y sobre todo Libia. Esta policrisis global, exacerbada por las secuelas de la pandemia y el drama humanitario de Oriente Medio, se ha visto acelerada por la invasión rusa de Ucrania. Nos enfrentamos a un nuevo orden global fragmentado, pero esta fragmentación va más allá de la simple tensión entre grandes bloques como Occidente y los BRICS. Como detalla un estudio reciente de la red Euromesco, la fragmentación es también institucional. Los marcos de cooperación tradicionales de la región, como la Unión por el Mediterráneo o la Política Europea de Vecindad, están rediseñando su impulso transformador e integrador. Este vacío se llena con tensiones que no son abstractas. Tienen un impacto directo en los mercados de los que dependemos. La guerra ha expuesto profundas vulnerabilidades a través de lo que algunos denominan la armalización de los costes energéticos y el mercado de fertilizantes. Ya no se trata solo de que algunos países dominen el mercado, sino de que haya actores que podrían buscar la coerción de países de la región de Oriente Medio y el norte de África, amenazando con bloquear sus exportaciones de fertilizantes. Al mismo tiempo, esta crisis está redibujando el mapa. La tradicional división norte-sur está siendo reemplazada por lo que el estudio citado llama una geografía líquida de la seguridad alimentaria de este a oeste. En ella emergen como actores estratégicos potencias regionales que no podemos ignorar. Turquía, por su control de puntos de estrangulamiento geoeconómicos como el Bósforo, y Marruecos, que actúa como un pivote estratégico al ser el cuarto exportador mundial de fertilizantes. Esta doble crisis climática y una geopolítica mucho más compleja y regionalizada tiene su epicentro más vulnerable en los sistemas agroalimentarios. Golpea con especial dureza la región de Oriente Medio y Norte de África, que es, como bien sabemos, la mayor región importadora de alimentos del mundo. Y golpea África Occidental y el Sahel, donde más de 40 millones de personas viven en situación de precariedad alimentaria. El análisis es claro. La cooperación agroalimentaria ha dejado de ser un ámbito de desarrollo blando, se ha convertido en un pilar central de la seguridad humana, la estabilidad regional y la estrategia geopolítica. El modelo tradicional ya no es suficiente. Antes de detallar la respuesta de la cooperación española, permítanme dar una breve pincelada cuantitativa que justifique nuestra estrategia. En este mapa se dibujan para el periodo 2024-2027 en azul los países prioritarios de la cooperación española y en verde y marrón los países prioritarios con estrategias definidas de desarrollo rural, territorial, seguridad alimentaria y lucha contra el hambre. Los datos de la AECID, que tenemos en la AECID sobre el sector agroalimentario nos muestran dos realidades que definen el nuevo Plan Director de la Cooperación Española 2024-2027. Primero, la prioridad cuantitativa. La ayuda oficial al desarrollo de la AECID para el sector ha crecido de forma sostenida, pasando de unos 35 millones de euros en 2019 a más de 80 millones de euros en 2024. El ODS 2, hambre cero, es una de nuestras principales prioridades, recibiendo el 10% del total de la ayuda oficial al desarrollo de la agenda. Segundo, la prioridad geográfica. El plan director eleva al África subsahariana, al Sahel, a región prioritaria. Esto no es solo una declaración, los datos lo respaldan. El 41% de nuestros fondos de desarrollo rural sostenible, la resiliencia a largo plazo, se destina ya al África subsahariana. Y el dato más revelador es el de la asistencia alimentaria de emergencia, la acción a corto plazo. Esta se concentra masivamente en el norte de África con un 34% y el África subsahariana con un 31%. Estos datos demuestran perfectamente el argumento del nexo humanitario-desarrollo. Estamos respondiendo a la emergencia, ayuda alimentaria, y construyendo resiliencia a largo plazo, desarrollo rural en las mismas geografías prioritarias. Voy a pasar ahora al marco conceptual que une todos estos datos que acabo de dar. La respuesta de la cooperación española a esta nueva era no ha sido un ajuste menor, ha sido una refundación legal y política de su sistema de cooperación. La nueva Ley 1/2023 de Cooperación para el Desarrollo Sostenible y la Solidaridad Global marca un hito y esta presentación se enmarca en el primer plan director de la cooperación española desarrollado bajo este mandato. Esta nueva arquitectura se basa en 4 pilares fundamentales. La primera es el compromiso financiero. La ley codifica un mandato legal para alcanzar el 0,7 de la renta nacional bruta para ayuda oficial al desarrollo en 2030. No es una aspiración política, es una obligación legal que proporciona previsibilidad y sitúa a España como un socio fiable. En segundo lugar, la expansión de prioridades geográficas. El plan director eleva a África subsahariana, con especial atención a África Occidental y al Sahel, a región prioritaria junto a nuestras regiones tradicionales de América Latina y el mundo árabe. Esta es una decisión geopolítica consciente para abordar las raíces de la inestabilidad de nuestra vecindad sur. En tercer lugar, el fortalecimiento del nexo humanitario. Paz-desarrollo. Reconociendo que el desarrollo es imposible en contextos de conflicto, la ley fija un mínimo del 10% de la AOD para acción humanitaria. Esto formaliza nuestro compromiso estratégico de trabajar en el nexo humanitario, desarrollo y paz, un pilar de nuestra adaptación a la fragilidad. En cuarto lugar, la reforma institucional. La ley fortalece a la Agencia Española de Cooperación Internacional para el Desarrollo como la piedra angular del sistema, dotándola de un mandato claro de coordinación operativa. En resumen, la adaptación de España no es meramente programática, es estructural. Hemos creado un marco más resiliente, predecible y robusto, diseñado específicamente para operar en este nuevo entorno volátil. ¿Cómo traducimos esta estructura legal en acción coherente? La comunidad internacional de donantes reconoce que el enfoque tradicional de proyectos aislados y silos sectoriales ha fracasado, ha sido mencionado previamente por Maurizio. La respuesta de la AECID es el nuevo marco conceptual que articula el plan director, que es la triple transición. Reconocemos que los desafíos del desarrollo son interdependientes. Por eso, integramos nuestras acciones en 3 ejes que se refuerzan mutuamente. La transición social, centrada en el bienestar de la población, los derechos humanos, la gobernabilidad democrática, salud, educación e igualdad de género. La transición ecológica, enfocada en la justicia climática, la lucha contra el cambio climático, protección de la biodiversidad y la gestión sostenible del agua. Y, en tercer lugar, la transición económica, orientada a la promoción de modelos de producción sostenibles, trabajo decente y digitalización inclusiva. Este marco es nuestra respuesta directa al llamado global para pasar de proyectos a sistemas y de silos a bienes públicos globales. Es nuestro modelo para gestionar la complejidad, reconociendo que no podemos abordar la seguridad alimentaria social sin abordar la gestión del agua, parte ecológica y el fortalecimiento de los mercados rurales o transición económica. El sector agroalimentario es el ejemplo perfecto de este nuevo marco sistémico en acción. No encaja en un único silo, es el nexo donde las 3 transiciones convergen. Nuestra adaptación en este nexo se define por 3 pilares: un enfoque político, una herramienta técnica y un método de intervención. En el enfoque político, no podemos olvidarnos del derecho a la alimentación. En la transición social, la prioridad central del plan director es la seguridad alimentaria y la lucha contra el hambre. Pero para la cooperación española esto no es solo un objetivo técnico. Es un pilar político y legal, es el derecho a la alimentación. Este enfoque basado en derechos nos alinea con el concepto de soberanía alimentaria, un concepto clave devolviendo el poder de decisión sobre los sistemas agroalimentarios a las comunidades locales. Esto se complementa con el enfoque explícitamente feminista de nuestro plan, que centra la acción en el empoderamiento de las mujeres rurales, las garantes de la seguridad alimentaria. En la transición ecológica, nuestra prioridad técnica es una doble apuesta que combina la innovación para la resiliencia climática y la intensificación agroecológica. No es una elección causal, es nuestra respuesta integral a la doble crisis. En la agroecología responde directamente a la crisis geopolítica al crear resiliencia y reducir la dependencia de los fertilizantes químicos importados. Este enfoque en la innovación a través de la agricultura de precisión y la digitalización responde a la crisis climática. Y en una región definida por el mar, esta transición debe ser también azul. Por ello integramos la economía azul y la promoción de alimentos azules como pilar de la sostenibilidad pesquera y acuícola. Pasando al método de intervención, en la tercera parte de los tres pilares que mencionaba, nuestra dotación más distintiva reside en el método. Más allá de financiar proyectos individuales, la cooperación española junto a la FAO ha impulsado una iniciativa que creemos que es única: los frentes parlamentarios contra el hambre. Este modelo prioriza la creación de estructuras políticas y legales soberanas, los propios parlamentos de los países socios, para que consagren el derecho a la alimentación en sus legislaciones y presupuestos, convirtiéndolo en una cuestión de Estado. Esto es un impacto sistémico centrado en la gobernanza que empodera a las instituciones nacionales para garantizar ese derecho a toda su población. Voy a pasar a dos ejemplos de áreas en las que trabajamos y que para demostrar cómo lo estamos llevando a la práctica, la parte más conceptual que he estado desarrollando hasta ahora. El modelo no es una teoría, es la arquitectura que ya guía nuestras intervenciones en nuestra vecindad sur. En el Sahel, África Occidental y Sahel son una nueva región prioritaria que enfrenta una aguda inestabilidad, incluyendo la fragmentación política con la retirada de Mali, Níger y Burkina Faso de la CEDAW. En este contexto, la decisión estratégica de España es clara: reiterar el apoyo a la integración regional. Nuestro nuevo programa de cooperación con la CEDAW es un microcosmos de la triple transición y una aplicación directa de nuestro trabajo en el nexo humanitario paz-desarrollo, alineando sus tres pilares: igualdad de género, desarrollo rural y energías limpias, con nuestro marco estratégico. En el mundo árabe, el programa Masaralan, estoy aquí como representante de este programa regional con el mundo árabe, y estando además en el CIAM, debo centrarme en la otra gran prioridad de la AECID, que es el Mediterráneo. Nuestra herramienta para implementar la triple transición en esta región es el nuevo programa Masaralan o Masar Ahora. Este programa actualiza nuestro compromiso para responder a los nuevos retos de la región, que su propio documento fundacional identifica como la crisis climática, la falta de oportunidades para jóvenes y mujeres y la necesidad de una triple transición. Y su arquitectura es la triple transición en la práctica. Las tres prioridades temáticas de Masaralan son empleo y creación de oportunidades, que es nuestra transición económica; la transición ecológica, medio ambiente y agua, que es nuestra transición ecológica; y la igualdad de género, que es nuestra transición social. Todo ello con un foco transversal en juventud, integración regional e inclusividad. No es una estrategia a futuro, es una realidad que estamos implementando hoy con muchos de los socios aquí presentes a través de nuestro instrumento de cooperación técnica Masar Connect. A modo de ejemplo, desde el programa Masaralan, con nuestros anfitriones, el CIAM Zaragoza, acabamos de lanzar un nuevo programa para sistemas agroalimentarios sostenibles. Con la Unión por el Mediterráneo estamos financiando programas de subvenciones para el empleo verde y un programa específico de Funding Readiness para mujeres emprendedoras en el sector agroalimentario. Con la FAO estamos implementando un programa de apoyo al emprendimiento juvenil en los sistemas agroalimentarios en la región MENA. Con la UICN, la Unión Internacional para la Conservación de la Naturaleza, el Centro para el Mediterráneo, a través del proyecto Tanquín, realizamos formaciones en sistemas agroalimentarios sostenibles, y con el ecosistema español de investigación estamos impulsando proyectos de transición agroecológica y agricultura regenerativa. Finalmente, ¿cómo financiamos esta transformación? También ha sido mencionado el ejemplo de Sevilla. La comunidad de donantes es clara: la AOD pública debe pasar de la ayuda a corto plazo a la inversión a largo plazo. El sector agroalimentario sufre de una infrafinanciación crónica, recibiendo menos del 5% de la financiación climática global, a pesar de sus enormes impactos y potencial. La conversación global que España tuvo el honor de hospedar en 2025 en Sevilla, en la cuarta conferencia internacional sobre financiación para el desarrollo, se centra en cómo ir mucho más allá de la AOD. El nuevo consenso es que la AOD pública debe usarse de forma catalítica para reducir el riesgo, apalancar y atraer capital privado a través de la financiación combinada, el blending finance y la inversión de impacto. La AECID ya se ha adaptado a esta realidad. La Ley 1/2023 que he mencionado antes reforma nuestra cooperación financiera creando el Fondo Español de Desarrollo Sostenible, el FEDES, que sustituye al anterior FONPRODE. El mandato del FEDES está explícitamente diseñado para este nuevo paradigma. Es más ágil, flexible y adscrito a la AECID con capacidad para realizar operaciones de financiación combinada o blending, cofinanciar con socios europeos como la plataforma GFIC y con IFIs como el FIDA, apalancar recursos adicionales del sector privado y adquirir capital en vehículos de inversión financieros para apoyar inversiones de impacto como las que requiere la transición agroecológica. Mientras la comunidad internacional se preparaba para debatir estos conceptos en Sevilla, España ya estaba legislando con la Ley 1/2023 y creado el instrumento, el FEDES, para implementar este nuevo modelo. Queremos posicionarnos como una agencia de vanguardia que esté lista para actuar. Como conclusión, ya termino. He estado delineando un contexto geopolítico y climático de fragmentación, una nueva arquitectura legal y financiera en la cooperación española y un marco conceptual sistémico, la triple transición, el derecho a la alimentación y la agroecología, que guía nuestra acción. Pero esta adaptación no puede ser solo de las agencias de cooperación de manera aislada, debe ser del sistema en su conjunto. La fragmentación de los donantes es el principal obstáculo para el impacto. El nuevo contexto de escasez de recursos y desafíos geopolíticos hace que la duplicación de esfuerzos y la competencia por proyectos aislados sean insostenibles. No podemos permitirnos el lujo de operar en silos. Hay que hacer un esfuerzo mayor que nunca para avanzar en una coordinación operativa de un sistema plural y diverso. Esto no es una aspiración burocrática, es un imperativo estratégico. Es necesario buscar sinergias y complementariedad, construir sobre la base de nuestras prioridades compartidas para que juntos podamos movilizar la escala de recursos públicos y privados necesaria para lograr un impacto real y duradero. En esta nueva era, la coordinación no es una opción, es la única vía hacia el impacto. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Santiago. And after the Spanish perspective, we turn to the Italian perspective. Federica de Gaetano holds a degree and a PhD in science with professional experience as food safety expert at the Italian Ministry of Agriculture for 10 years and at the European Commission's DG Sante for 7 years. Since 2020, she has served as food security and rural development expert at the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. She is co-chair of the Global Donor Platform for Rural Development and participates in the G7 EU Food Security Working Group, contributing to international policy discussions for low and middle income countries, including initiatives under Italy's Mattei Plan in Africa. Federica, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Just to be sure, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thanks a lot. So, first of all, it's a pleasure for me to participate to the Today International Symposium, and I would like to thank the CIHEAM Zaragoza for inviting me to contribute to this strategic and important moment. Events such as this one have a special value. They can create a bridge between institution and the technical community. This is not just about transferring knowledge or presenting data, but about building a shared vision and, most importantly, generating practical collaboration. As already was mentioned, I actually today I work in Brussels at the permanent representation of Italy to the EU, and I work. I am in mission for my agency, so the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation. I am also co-chair of the Global Donor Platform for Rural Development, and yes, I will spend some word later on this kind of role that was really, really important for me. just to move on, I would like to give you an overview of our agency. So I may say that the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation is one of the key innovations introduced by the Cooperation Italian Reform Law and began its operation in January 2016. The agency headquarters are in Rome, while we have an hub in Florence and 20 field offices worldwide for assessing local needs, implementing development initiatives, monitoring results, and building partnership on the ground. Here we have a picture with our presence globally, and as you can see, we have most of our field offices in Africa, while of course we have also field offices in Latin America, in Balkan area, in Asian and East Europe, in Ukraine. We can say that our strategic objectives are, first of all, eradicating poverty, reducing inequality, promoting human rights and gender equality, preventing conflicts, and supporting peace processes. We are, as agency, we are the operational arms of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Cooperation. So we operate with an integrated cooperation system involving both public and private stakeholders. And our main guiding principle are local ownership of development processes, alignment with the EU policy, delegated cooperation, integration among public, private, and private societies actors. Just to give you an overview on our overall resources in 2024, starting from almost 7 million euro, while in 2025 the resource was increased to the 900 million euro with the 79 initiative with the EU, within the EU, so delegated cooperation agreements. And for concerning the resource, I would rather say that it is important that the resources allocated for the civil society organization, that was about 40 million euro, and for the emergency almost 300 million euro. At the sector of the food security and agriculture, we can see that we in 2024 the resource allocated for the food security area was 116 million euro. So food security is a really important area for our agency. But on the other hand, nowadays, considering all the challenge that already was mentioning from the previous relators today, we can say that it is important to considering that we cannot speak only about food security, but all the time nowadays, more than before, are linked each other. So we need to consider all the themes together as for the SDGs goals. So when we talk about food security, we need to consider the link with the climate energy nexus and the migration, the importance of the gender, and of course of the finance, wherever has been already mentioning the importance of the new financial tools for all the cooperation area. On the other hand, I would like also to mention the importance of the research and data, in particular on the harmonization of the data on food security. We have plenty of database, plenty of data, but there is the issue of harmonizing the data in the sense to allow us to better use such data to enforce our initiative, our project, and of course we cannot forget the importance of the artificial intelligence and the digitalization of the sector, agri-food sector. So they are all, I would like to stress, yes, the importance of the interlinked of all these kind of themes. The Italian Agency for Development Cooperation concerning the agri-food sector focuses in particular on priority partner countries, which depend on agriculture pastoral economies, small-scale farmers, so managed by small producers with a low degree on technical innovation. At the same time, the development of the agri-food processing industry and the use of unconventional water resources became time to time always more, important to be stressed. Based on consolidated experience in the agriculture and food security sector, the project supported by AECID are primarily aimed at promoting diversified and ecologically sustainable food production, favoring the link between nutrition and health, with particular attention to crops with a higher nutritional value and a greater resilience to climate change. I just reported some key area of our really that are really important for in our project. So the sustainable agriculture, the transformation of food system, the smallholders farmers, the agri-food processing industries, and the irrigation system. So considering the challenges, the strategic direction of our agency is defined by 3 priorities. First of all, expanding the field network, particularly in Africa. As you have seen, we have most of the field offices in Africa because the last years we did the Mattei plan. We stressed our project, our intervention in particular in Africa, and concerning the Mattei plan, I can say that the Mattei plan is focusing on different area, including the agriculture, and in particular for agriculture is aiming to create resilient, competitive agriculture sector and safe, certified supply chain. Considering for Mattei plan, it's very important to collaborate with Italian companies and advanced technology that will boost economic growth, enhance supply chain, and increase employment, improving incomes, in particular for small farmers. Also, training will be very important and an asset for modernizing agriculture. The last priority is diversifying funding sources with the growing access to EU and multilateral financing. So for us, it will be very important to diversify the funding sources and to use the new financial tools. This aspect is very important for Italy. And at the same time, we are improving the monitoring system and the results framework to inform strategic decision and increase transparency. Again, the importance of the data and the evidence of data. In the framework of the Mattei Plan, I would like to also to mention the two the two big initiatives we can say, and in particular, Italy and the European Commission, they reaffirmed their partnership under the framework of the Mattei Plan for Africa and the EU Global Gateway Strategy to work with Africa and realize a sharing vision for sustainable growth, resilience, and mutually beneficial cooperation. We have ongoing the initiative on coffee value chain, and as well, we have another initiative that is very important for the agri-food sector, that is transforming and empowering resilience and responsible agribusiness, called Terra. In particular, Terra is managed by Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, mobilizing a total of around 110 million through EU guarantee and FAO technical assistance. I want also to come back to the EU, our initiative on Global Gateway with the EU on the coffee value chain, because this is a good example where Italy is like establish a global private fund, coffee fund. So this is a good example of a tentative, of improving and use new financial tools, of strengthening the private and the public sector and coordination in order to use financial resources and know-how from both public sector and private sector, in order to design solutions that can work in a good way for both. We can say that yes, that this coffee initiative is really an example of a participation of a prominent Italian corporation, and we have also like knowledge partner, and also like private sector involved as Lavazza and Illy Caffè, and the coffee, this initiative will be implemented in 5 pilot countries such as Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Malawi.
Federica, you have 2 more minutes.
Yes, sorry. So I've just finished saying that I also underline the global challenges and on the other hand, the needs on, considering our perspective. And of course, I cannot, I agree with Maurizio when he said that it's very important to enhance the donor coordination. So through also my participation as co-chair to the Global Donor Platform, I realize how much is important really that the donor can really speak each other, coordinate each other. So this is a very important aspect. And for us, in particular, of course, also resilience is very important, as also the other key points that I mentioned, like governance and partnership, new financial solution, and private sector engagement, among the others that I mentioned here. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Federica. Let's focus now on scientific cooperation, research, and innovation. Elisabeth Claverie de Saint-Martin studied at the French prestigious École Normale Supérieure and École Nationale d'Administration and began her career as a researcher in microeconomics. She joined the civil service in 1993 and quickly began to work under direct authority of 3 French ministers, finance, research, and foreign affairs, as well as the service of the Spanish government. In 2013, she was appointed Senior Advisor to the Executive Director for France at the World Bank in Washington, D.C., where she worked on the elaboration and management of public development aid policies. She joined the CIRAD in 2018 as General Director of Research and Strategy before being appointed CEO in June 2021. Elisabeth, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great honor. I would have loved to be in Zaragoza, which is a very beautiful city, but I could not, unfortunately. So perhaps I will say you next, because it's better that you take this slide. So next, I will go through quite rapidly because I know that we are a bit late. So CIRAD is the French Agricultural Research and International Cooperation Organization. So it works in an area which is geographically delimited, which is tropical zones and Mediterranean regions. So it works to help build more resilient farming systems, food system, forest for a more sustainable, inclusive work. This is an applied science institution. It's not fundamental science. Next. So we work under the authority, the supervision of two ministers, the Minister of Research and the Minister for Foreign Affairs, as we work mainly in foreign countries. And our goal is really to focus on cooperation so that the countries where we work can achieve a better level of development, notably in agriculture. Next. So where do we focus our efforts? Mainly in two SDGs. The first one, which is no poverty, and the second one, which is zero hunger. And we do it working on partnership with the partnership method, which is SDG number 17. But we also work on climate change, on biodiversity, and also on water and land pollution. Next. So where, next slide to see the map where we are. So we work in more than 50 countries. It means when I say 50 countries, in fact, we work with more countries, but in more than 50 countries, we have long-term agreements with scientists being there for quite a long time, minimum 3 years for each scientist. We have regional offices, 2 in France, the headquarters in Paris, but the scientific infrastructure, they are in Montpellier, which is in the south of France. And we work also, and I will touch upon after on this issue, on overseas territory. Just like Spain, we have overseas territories, and they're very important because they are bases for our regional cooperation. For instance, the one we have in La Réunion, very close to Madagascar. It helps us to work in the whole Indian Ocean. So in these countries, we do research in partnership. I'm going to explain a bit more. So next. So perhaps a focus on French overseas region, which is something particular that we share with Spain, is that we have these territories. And these territories, we have a mission, which is to contribute to sustainable agricultural development in this tropical region, which is not the same agriculture as in Europe. And we try to work with Europe on European regional funds to foster, first, better agriculture, more sustainable, with higher yields, but also a better better links with the regional environment of these territories, so that these territories are not only dependent on mainland Europe, but also they can have commercial, scientific relations with their neighbors. Next. So some figures, just to tell you a bit more what we are. About 1,700 people, 1,200 scientists. Scientists means engineers and PhD and professors, and more than 800 researchers, which can train people on doctoral work. Our budget is 250 million euros and being quite stable. The French government provides us with half, and half of it is contractual resources. As you can see, we have quite a lot of articles published, and this is our main task. Half of our articles are published with colleagues in the countries where we work, I mean, South countries. Next, and I will go a bit more in detail with our resources. So our budget, half of our budget is contractual resources, not just money, it's the way we work. And in this project, you can see that we work in a very diversified kind of partnership. 29% is public research donors. We work, so it can be Horizon Europe in Europe, it can be the National Agency for Research in France, well, the research ecosystem. 24% is public development donors, and it can be the French Agency for Development, which is AFD, the counterpart of AECID, but it can also be the World Bank and so on. 27% are private donor, and this is one of our specialties, that we have a lot of contracts. We have more than 600 living contracts with the private sector. Private sector means small firms, but it can also mean big firm, Nespresso, Danone, Baricaibo, all the big ones. And 20% is working while financing specially devoted to overseas territories. Next, so to give you an idea of the science that we use, and I will go short on that because we're not a scientific conference, we have three main scientific departments. One, which is called biological system, which works, I would say, really on genetics, on the product. Then we have another one, which is the performance of tropical production and processing system, PERSIST, and it works really at the level of the farm, if I could say. And the last one is environment and society. It works at the global level, notably on modelization for climate change, diversity, and so on, biodiversity. Perhaps next. The thematics we deal with. We have two main thematics, biodiversity, climate change. So as to reach the goals we have in these two overwhelming thematics, biodiversity and climate change, we use three other levels, I would say, thematics which are devoted to the first one. Food system, supporting the transition to more sustainable inclusive food system. Agroecological transition, which is really something we've been going through for decades. And One Health, which we're working a lot on. And we use what we call territory-based approaches, which is a way to work on governance, and it has been proved and evaluated. And this is our methods. Next. Furthermore, we have a specialty on value chains. And this is why we work so much with the private sector and also so much with the European Commissions. As you can see, we work in 15 value chains. It means that in all these products, commodity plants, you may call them the way you like, we have an integrated knowledge for sustainable development, from the genetics to the market evaluation. And we have scientists which are affiliated to these value chains. Next. What we try to do more and more, and this has to do a lot with what the precedent speakers underlined, is to informing public policy, to help public policies to be the best targeted and to have maximum impact. So we conduct studies, we produce support decision-making, we analyze public policies, and we also make appraisals, notably for the European Commission. We're doing it for some reports and policies, but also at the national level. Next. For this, we work a lot with what we call platforms in partnership. Platforms in partnership, it's a way to make partnerships happen in the fields where we work. This is a very open structure. The French presence is very limited in it. It's led by the countries from the south, but inside you can have also private sector, a lot have CGR inside. So you can see the names of all these platforms. They're in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, some vary on public policies, some on One Health, some on agroecology. They have thematics and they work in network in all places. Next. We also have partnerships in Europe. Europe is our really not only main donor, but Europe is our main counterpart, I would say, as we have experts, we have people working for the European Commission inside the services, whether DG INPA or DG RTD, and we have position in the subgroups, as you can see in European Union. And I would perhaps underline Agri-Natura, which is a very strong network of institutions just like CIRAD, and the director is from CIRAD. You have Wageningen, you have a lot of big institutions working to coordinate, and that was very emphasized precedently by the speakers, to coordinate our efforts towards southern countries. Then I have the French partnership, but I will, so next, and perhaps we go to the next, yeah, because this is not so important for you. So next, I will say a word on innovation and sustainable development. Yeah, perhaps on the next one. Is that we have a special brand, which is innovation, which is CIRAD Innov. So perhaps that's the next slide. Yeah, thank you. And we have two firms that we have created, one on banana, one on palm oil, to develop seeds which are really sustainable. And so we work to really have an offer to the socio-economic world with patent, with proposal, with cooperation, with expertise, and this is a brand we have created. And of course, we have very strong ethical commitment to use this. For instance, the patent is free of rights to least developed countries and so on. So having always a mission in the head. So perhaps next, I would like to underline this point, is that we've developed an impact method that we've proposed to the European Commission. And impact is a very trendy word, but we've been working on it for 10 years. So we have really a very strong method, and we use it for our own contracts, and we use it also to evaluate other agencies' work. Also, perhaps next, to underline that we train and we do capacity building. This is the next slide. This is very important because you have really, at the end, the goal of the CIRAD, just like, I guess, other institutions just like us with the same mandate. We would like to have less people on the ground and more people from the south doing things. So we really devote a lot of time, money, energy to train at all levels. And we have a network of alumni. Perhaps next, this is a sustainable development and social responsibility, just to tell you that we really try to have the same norms when we work abroad that we do in Europe. That's very complicated. So I just wanted to make a point on it. I mean, everything which is in compliance and green buildings and so on. So this is a huge investment. We do it in France and we try to do it abroad.
Elisabeth, you have 2 more minutes.
Okay, and I finish. Perhaps next. Ethical commitment. We can go to the next slide. I just talk about this is very important for us. Science with the society. This is important. It's really that we commit to have to devote more time and more money to really scientific mediation, so that the citizens, whether it's in Africa, whether it has no scientific background, can understand the proposals. When it comes, for instance, to having a new seed, a new way of having irrigation, we want them to understand why we propose this, not only to have the solution like this. So it's always participated. Next, perhaps one word on open science, that we signed everything. You can find all the articles and work we make really in open science, in open data. And I guess that's finished. and thank you for your patience and your attention.
Thank you very much, Elisabeth. Our last presentation addresses the problem from a funding perspective. Songbae Li's most recent appointment was at the USAID Agricultural Finance Team lead, supporting efforts to mobilize capital for agriculture. Before this role, he spent 8 years at Claverie Impact Capital, a nonprofit impact investing debt fund, where he was responsible for deal origination, credit assessment, and ongoing portfolio monitoring. Prior to that, he worked for Dresdner Kleinwort Wasserstein in the Global Energy Investment Banking Group in New York City, Bank of America, Securities in the Real Estate Investment Banking Group in San Francisco, and Mercy Corps in their microfinance institution in Kyrgyzstan. He holds an MBA from the University of Chicago and a Bachelor of Science from the University of Vermont. Songbae, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much. Is my slide showing? Sorry, I didn't use the template.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, Songbae Lee. Hello from a suburb in Washington, D.C. Happy to be here this morning. Starting out by saying they gave each of us 15 minutes, and it's a lot of time. I'm usually given 2 or 3 minutes, but I hope it'll be useful and that you'll learn something. I'll also really commend the other speakers or the organizers for keeping everyone very on track. I've never seen people fit their time so well. So the themes I want to touch on are, see if I can move my slide, investing, collaborating, and efficiency. And none of these are new. They've been touched on by most of our speakers. Hopefully, I'll be trying to ground them in some practical examples. So really, I think we've been hearing a lot about like the what should we do, and I will try to focus more on the how are we doing it. I think as Federica mentioned, this is, I didn't realize it. I guess Elisabeth first mentioned this is a scientific conference, but Federica mentioned how this is bridging to the technical side, and I think I'm that other side of the bridge on the technical side. So I am bringing the donor perspective, but my work was really actually on the implementation of these projects. So again, on my slides, they're not so polished, but I really do want you to focus on the examples. So the first topic about investing, and I'll just stop here for a second because what do I mean by this? I think Elisabeth mentioned that impact investing is a buzzword. We keep hearing the term catalytic capital. So what do all these terms mean? So just to step back and give a little bit of a context. So we hear impact investing is probably the broadest group, the broadest umbrella, and that covers any type of investing that wants to have a social or environmental impact. And then we hear development finance, not so much anymore, but it's where I started. But that's really just means investing done by development finance institutions. So impact investing is an approach. Development finance is more actors, specific actors in that space. And then we talk about blended finance. Blended finance is a structure under impact investing. And to have blended finance, you need 2 things. You need catalytic capital and commercial capital. So the blended finance is a structure, and the catalytic capital is a type of capital that you need that the donors provide. And that capital, when everyone talks about leverage or mobilizing private capital, it happens because the catalytic capital comes in and then the commercial capital comes in on top. And that's the leverage that happens. So just wanted to kind of go over that. So the whole point is, when we talk about the catalytic capital, the ODA that we use, if we use it for catalytic capital, to crowd in more capital, is to expand the size of the pie, right? Because we keep saying there's this huge gap and we don't have enough ODA to meet it. So we need to bring in more capital from the commercial markets. So we want to expand the pie. That's the first main point. The second point, which is often overlooked, is commercial capital needs a return. So I'm sure all of us, or most of us, many of us have read reports that talk about how much capital that this activity is going to crowd in, which is great, which is what we want. But what they don't talk about or don't focus on or even mention is what is the return of that project. So we have to remember, if we have ODA, that's a grant, all we care about is the social return. We don't care about the financial return. But if we're talking about blended finance, we need a financial return. So you just have to remember that. That's probably the first point people need to remember. What's the return of the project? And then what's the required return of the commercial investor? People say this is a great project. Why don't commercial investors fund it? Because they're not there for only the social return. They're there for the financial return. So I'm banging my hand on the table, but this is something that has frustrated me a lot. So a great example of a blended finance activity to achieve both financial and social returns is the Nutritious Foods Financing Facility, N3F. It was designed by Gain. It's managed by Incofin, which is important, a professional fund manager, and it was anchored by USAID. We gave $5 million. So what does that mean? I'm also going to talk a little bit about the detail in the weeds. So how does this work? USAID is a donor. We gave $5 million as an investment into a fund managed by N3F, managed by Incofin. What did we do in actuality? We gave $5 million into a foundation because we can't invest and we're giving grants, but we want that grant to be invested into the fund. So we had to make a structure. We grant to the foundation invests into the fund. And since it's an investment, that fund has to repay the money eventually to the foundation, or it could sit there in perpetuity. This is an open-ended fund, so the money can stay there forever and it can keep being recycled. But if the money ever did come back, then the foundation would have to use it for the same purposes. But at that point, USAID is out of the picture. It's now the foundation's decision. And USAID, while it existed, was on the steering committee or the advisory board, which I was the representative of it. So what's the interesting thing about N3F? It focuses on nutritious foods. Nutrition is something that's typically been supported by the public sector with grants. And now we are trying to expand the support for nutritious foods with commercial capital. And that's what N3F is doing. So the important thing to remember is it's trying to make nutrition into an investable activity, not just donor funded. And that's very challenging. And that's why they're the first of its kind. And the reason why it's so special, if you look at most agricultural investment funds, they're focusing on cash crops. I would estimate 70, 80% of all the funding that goes from investment funds into food systems is on cash crops. I think Federica also mentioned the coffee fund. It's mostly coffee and cocoa because it has a social impact, but also it's much easier. It has a higher return and it's lower risk than if you invest in local value chains that are producing food for the local markets. So the only thing I would probably do different about N3F today versus when we funded it previously is I would have invested it not directly, and when I say directly, through the foundation from USAID, but through FASA. And I'm going to talk about FASA next when we talk about collaboration. I'm looking at my own timer here. So the one thing about collaboration, all I mean is don't do anything alone. This is my second thing. I just want people to remember. As a donor, and I'm talking to donors, and I don't know if there are any other donors here, but that's my target audience. Don't do anything alone. I mean, first of all, we know that there's not enough ODA to meet the need. And of course, there's no single donor can do it by themselves. So we have to work together to maximize our impact. The second thing, on a much more practical basis, in my mind, it's a low bar. If you cannot convince one other donor that your idea is good, I don't think you should do it. It's just a litmus test. So I think there's plenty of good reasons why you should work together. And I would say at my time at USAID, extra slide, these are the activities. I talked about N3F. I'll be talking about FASA and AECID now. But let's look at the donors. None of these are single donor activities. They're all pooling multiple donors. USAID, Norway, Canada, Switzerland, the UK. I would love to see more donors in these buckets. What I don't like to see, and personally I would avoid working on when I was at USAID, is any activity that we funded only by ourselves. Because not only do I think that we need to work together, but also jumping ahead a little bit to my last point on the efficiency, learning together. It's just almost impossible to learn together if you're not working together. So AECID and FASA. I'm not going to go into detail about these activities, but you can look them up. They have great websites. But basically, they represent two channels for getting capital down to small and medium-sized enterprises. One works through investment funds, one works through banks. Both are multi-donor funded, as I mentioned. The interesting thing about them is, if you look at funds versus banks, funds are attracting new capital. That's where you get the capital mobilization. They're attracting capital from Western investors, local investors, but it's new capital into the investment fund. Whereas the banks, you want them, they already have the capital in local deposits. You need them to reallocate that capital, but that's a different type of leverage. That's still leverage if it's targeting the type of impact sectors that you want them to because of the incentives you give them. So you have banks, you have funds, you have AECID, you have FASA, and the other thing the last thing I'll mention about them is that they work with multiple partners. Basically, it's not defined in the agreement with FASA and AECID who they work with. It's the type of organizations, the type of capital providers they work with, but they can work with anyone. Because if someone comes to you with a proposal and say they're going to solve the problem, we know that's not going to happen. You need to work with a variety of providers because no single provider is going to solve the problem. So both of these are not just pooling donors to be more efficient on the funding side, but they are taking a market-based approach and working with multiple partners. And there's no restrictions. So we're pooling resources, and now we have to figure out how to measure together, which brings me to my last point: efficiency, effectiveness. And this is something, the example I'll be using is GDPRD. Thankfully, I don't need to talk much about it. We have Federica, who's the co-chair of GDPRD. We had Maurizio talk about GDPRD. The specific activity that I'm talking about is within GDPRD, there are certain working groups, and one of the working groups is on blended finance. And that working group is working on something called the Catalytic Capital Framework. Now, if you didn't follow all that is to mean is all this talk, and I think all the people on this panel agree we need to share data. But when the rubber hits the road, it's very challenging. We know that. When someone tells me on a senior level meeting, yes, we support sharing data. When we get on a call with the people on the technical side, they say it's impossible. So there's a lot of things we need to do to go from big statements to the actual work. So another thing I love about the GDPRD is they are so transparent. They have all the meeting minutes published on their website. And then on the Catalytic Capital Framework, which is being led by the Agri-SME Learning Collective, they've released their first findings from talking to 5 different bilateral donors. And this framework is something that's in early stages. It's been a year already, and they're continuing to work on that. So this is the Agri-SME Learning Collective and their members. So we keep talking about trust. So we keep talking about data transparency, data sharing. Why doesn't it happen? And I'd say that on the practical side, because we need trust, we need incentives, and we need pressure. And I think, one of the things that the GDPRD does is pressure. I mean, convening is a nice way for me to think about pressure. I think we have a core group of bilateral donors who are agreeing to come to the table. We're still trying to figure out how they can share the data, but we're hoping with this core group, once we can demonstrate that some sort of peer pressure, that we can get other donors to agree. Because again, even if we came up with a framework, it wouldn't matter if people don't sign up and agree to it and share the data that they have as well. So I think the interesting thing is I'm a donor. I'm representing the donor, but I am an ex-donor, no longer at USAID, here representing myself in a personal capacity. But I did have a chance to reach out to some other donors just to make sure that I'm not saying anything out of school. And they confirmed that I think that they agree. They agree with what other people are saying. I think, and some of the topics I've pointed out. I spoke to or heard back from Switzerland, Korea, and Norway, and they're all saying the same things. I mean, they try to use the little budget they have to be as catalytic as possible to mobilize private resources to maximize development outcomes. And what do they use? They use it as first loss. They want to share risk. They want to crowd in additional capital.
Songbae, 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And so I'll just say the one additional point that I didn't raise that was brought up when I asked for that feedback is agriculture is a difficult market. This goes back to the point I was making about returns. We can definitely mobilize commercial capital for agriculture. Will it ever be 100% sustainable on commercial capital alone? Not in the near future. And all we need to do is look at Europe and the US. Agriculture is heavily subsidized. So it's just we have to kind of remember that reference point that yes, more commercial capital is needed, more commercial capital can be used. But in the end, it's a difficult market and it's a political priority. And so most models, all models actually that I know of, will require continuous subsidy. So just to end, so some of the details I've shared about these activities may be new, but the points I've gone over I don't think any of them are. So what's been stopping us? I would say institutional rules, risk aversion, and career incentives. They're not actually well aligned with some of the things I've been talking about. So what might be needed? I mean, this may be dramatic, but I would say courage. And so what do I mean by that? I think Incofin and Gain had the courage to try to fund local value chains instead of cash crops. And it's difficult. I would say AECID and FASA had the courage to take the time to pull that donor capital and do it together because that's more difficult. It's more challenging. It takes a long time. And GDPRD has the courage to engage all these donors and make transparent all the work that they're trying to do behind the scenes. So I think those are all great examples, and even with the challenges that I've kind of outlined, it's why I still remain hopeful about the way forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Songbae. This was the last presentation, so we have, I guess, 5-10 minutes left. So we invite attendees to ask questions to the panelists. Any questions, any comments that you may have? Yes, we have one question.
Thank you for Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the panel. It was very interesting to follow. What I wanted to ask is what would be one takeaway from this presentation in terms of deprioritization of certain topics in food systems? We talked about market, we talked about gender, we talked about equality, climate change. How the first presentation made it clear that there is a consensus, but at the same time, when the last presentation was done, there was this agreement that if one donor disagrees, we shouldn't be doing so. And I think we are also reaching this period of time that sometimes donors disagree between the priorities. So within agri-food systems, it would be great to see how we have a shared vision, whether it's this SDG agenda, whether it's food systems transformation. We have many foundations related to that. Thank you. I hope I was clear and I could clarify once again.
I'm going to have an attempt at responding, but the others can also complement. I didn't understand really the point that you mentioned, whether Songbae said that if one donor disagrees, then it's a no-go. No, I don't think that nobody has really made the point like that. We are in a moment where donors are looking at their portfolios and they've been asked to do, as I said before, more with less resources. Okay, we are in a situation where some themes will have to be prioritized, some others would have to be, favored at the expenses of others. Each donor will have their own political priorities. Clearly, the priorities of Italy are similar but not equal to the priorities of Spain, France, and Germany. So we are in a context where harmonization is a must and a request from the global community, but is becoming increasingly difficult. You can see some trends coming from the Seville conference, coming from the latest years that we've witnessed, coming from the different political priorities of the various governments that are, changing around us. One of which is the call for value for money, again, doing more with less. The second is reorienting a portion of ODA approaches towards de-risking. And Songbae made an excellent presentation on that, explaining what we mean by that. But the risking is clearly one of the big frontiers that donors will have to explore, public donors will have to explore and look at if they want to continue, with how do I say, with public aid towards the food and agricultural sector. I think I'll stop here if others have other things to. I hope I have partially at least answered your question. Thanks.
I don't know if anyone, any other panelist wants to intervene and
Sure. I just wanted to add 2 points, if that's okay. Yeah. So first, just to clarify, it's not if one donor disagrees, don't do it. Don't do it unless at least one other donor agrees. So that's the whole point about don't go alone. If you can have plenty of people disagree, but the second point, I'm glad the question was asked because there was a final point that I wanted to make, but forgot to as I was running out of time. I don't think we'll ever have enough ODA to solve the problems. So I do think we need more ODA. We do need to use the existing ODA more effectively. But really, I think of everything we do as two things. One is demonstration. We are showing what can be done. And the second is so it's to influence. And eventually, it needs to affect policy. I mean, there's some things that will always need the traditional ODA as grants. But if we're talking about system change, the finance, no matter how innovative a finance product is, by itself, it won't make the type of system change that we need. And you can look at history, you can look at examples. The one I like to use is the mortgage market, the housing market in the US. You have the financial innovation with the 30-year mortgage, but that wouldn't exist without the government agencies that provide the secondary market that provides liquidity for that financial product.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? Any other? Okay.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdurrahman Gandour, former UNICEF and now the president of Résonance Humanitaire, international French NGO that caters for human capital in the humanitarian development sector. I just wanted to quickly not ask a question, but make a remark, which is also a question to everybody. This is about the EU, right? The topic was initially about the EU and the development aid in the EU. And I heard someone saying EU needs to be more political. But more political sometimes means less financial, because very often funding and money is the easy answer to things. The European Union, take the example of Palestine. We're going to talk about Palestine later, but the EU gave so much money to this particular country without putting political will in it. So when it's financial, it's usually not political. So if we are moving back to political, which is what we need, then we need to be much more strategic in terms of funding. You've mentioned it. For example, you gave the example of no cash crops and value chains instead, Songbae. So what are the suggestions? I've heard it in general terms. What are the suggestions of strategic funding with less money and more political astuteness? Thank you.
Songbae, will you please?
Sure. I think it's a great question. I mean, a couple ways to answer that. One is it's, my own naivete, right? When I joined USAID, I just thought I was doing development work, and I realized or didn't realize I was joining a political organization. So politics is important. I think the second part about that is when you work in a political organization, it's all about accountability, not necessarily impact. But you need to have all that because that's the reason why we have the access to so many resources that no one else has. So I think there's those pros and cons. But the one thing, the last thing I'll say is that I'll agree, finance is the easy thing. We're focused on how to make it more effective. So we're talking about the challenges, but in the broader scheme of things, it's the easy thing to do. And I agree. And that's why we do it. That's why I do it, right? I liked it and it was easier. What I think is much more needed, what you're calling politics, political commitment, I call policy, is much messier. And why don't we do it? Because it's messy, it takes a long time, and it's hard to measure. But I agree, it's what's needed. And I would say that discussion is probably outside the kind of the realm or of the discussion we're having. But that's where I would say personally, my interest has been moving towards less from transactions and deals and even structuring and more onto that system change, which would require more of that political will and policy change.
Thank you very much for this illustrative answer.
I'm sorry, we have one question about in the chat. Can I transmit the question in the chat, read in the chat? It's for anyone. Huh? The question is regarding the impact of country policies on funding priorities projects. This is the question. The impact of country policies on funding priorities projects.
Maybe Santiago or Federica.
Bueno,
Yes.
no entiendo. Sí, bueno, Federica. Bueno, yo, es nada, solo una cosa que no entiendo muy bien la pregunta, pero un comentario que también vale, yo creo, para algunas de las preguntas que ha habido previamente, y es que realmente nosotros, como agencias de cooperación, no trabajamos a partir de la nada, sino que hay unos documentos políticos previos, hay unas estrategias que se trabajan, entre otras cosas, con los países socios, que son los países en los que trabajamos. Entonces, las estrategias se construyen a partir del diálogo con esos países y luego internamente diálogo también con la sociedad civil, con las ONGs que están trabajando, con lo cual eso un poco, quiero decir que las decisiones no son decisiones caprichosas, sino que llevan un trabajo detrás que además son producto de unas evaluaciones previas. Lo mismo pasa con la Unión Europea. La Unión Europea tiene unos documentos, unos marcos políticos. Esta mañana se ha estado comentando el tema del Pacto para el Mediterráneo, que eso luego se aterriza con unos programas plurianuales que a su vez se han discutido por parte de las delegaciones de la Unión Europea con los gobiernos de cada país. O sea, quiero decir que esto no son tampoco decisiones caprichosas, sino que hay todo un trabajo. Se puede estar más de acuerdo con los resultados o no, pero que todo parte un poco de ese trabajo previo. En cuanto a las metodologías, se construyen pues como lo que estamos haciendo ahora y lo que se ha estado comentando en todo este encuentro. Son metodologías que al final en la comunidad de personas y entidades que trabajan en la cooperación se van construyendo de una manera un poco común. Hemos estado hablando de Sevilla, ¿no? A partir de ahí pues hay una serie de consensos que tienen una repercusión en el modo de trabajo de las agencias. Y bueno, yo creo que es una respuesta un poco general, pero un poco por poner los puntos un poco sobre cómo se construyen al final las políticas de cooperación.
Federica, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I may say that I totally agree with the Spanish colleague because also for Italy is the same. We take into account the political strategy of the country, the document, but also dialogue with the on the field, because through our field offices there is and also the embassy, of course. There is a continuous dialogue with the local authority, we can say, in order to have first of all, the knowledge of the situation on the field concerning a specific political issue, and then also the project that we develop. We can say that our aim also to in a certain way to stress and to enhance the local regulation, we can say, no, in order to implement specific regulatory measure in order to amplify, in order to have a better answer on the ground, you know, concerning specific political issue on the agri-food and on the production, agricultural production. So there are plenty of regulation that has to be enhanced on the basis of the different kind of country, partner countries. So we have really an open dialogue with the local authority, that's for sure. And also we consider the impact on the country policy of our project. This is very important for us. Thank you.
I think Elisabeth also raised her hand.
No, I didn't raise my hand. I can suggest 2 words, perhaps more than just underlying that we South countries' policies can be defined in many ways, because if you work, for instance, with the World Bank, it's the Ministry of Finance. If you work like ourselves with a scientist or Minister of Agriculture, you can hear another music, if I may say. And the idea is that, of course, you have to take fully into account what the governments want, because you work in their territories, but you also have to be very careful listening to civil society, to scientists, to smallholders. And in fact, the priorities in these countries are not so obvious as it could seem in the national plans you can read. This is why we always try to really have a multi-pronged approach, just to understand fully the needs, not just the words for the donors. What is needed? What is wanted?
Thank you very much. I'm afraid that we are reaching the end of the session. We are running out of time. I wanted to thank all the speakers. I think that this session, at least for me, has been very illustrative. I've learned a lot. And we've learned about how the strategies and the priorities of the national agencies are being adapted to the new situation. We've learned a lot about innovative financing. We've learned about coordinating versus fragmentation. Don't do anything alone, is what we've heard. And that, of course, these new strategies and new models are oriented to achieve a more efficient cooperation and try to increase the impact of this cooperation in the people's prosperity and well-being. Okay, and thank you very much for your attention.